Love this podcast? Support it and sponsor today. Simply head to ozcastnetwork.com for details.
Hi everyone, it's Amy here. This week's Love on Campus covers adult content, which may include discussions of explicit sex, sexual violence, and power kinks such as BDSM, and other topics not safe for work or for young ears. If you have triggers around these topics, please be aware and take care.
Love on Campus acknowledges that we meet on the traditional lands of the Kaurna people of the Adelaide Plains. We recognise and respect their cultural heritage and beliefs and relationship with this land. We acknowledge that these lands are of continuing importance to the Kaurna people living today, and we extend that respect to other Aboriginal language groups and other First Nations people.
Welcome back to Love on Campus. I'm Dr. Amy Matthews and I am here today with Georgia Nichols.
Hello.
And Kathleen Stanley.
Hello.
And today we finally hit Book Club Week.
Yay!
So we've been...
That felt really fake, but it was genuine, okay?
Excited.
Wait, is there a celebration one of these buttons?
Yay! We've been holding off talking about the book amongst ourselves, even though we've all read it and marked it up because we've been hanging out for today. So the way we've structured this, since we're still going through our first few episodes, is that we are kind of talking about one of Pamela Regis's 8 essential elements of romance one week, and then we're going to a subgenre. We did academic romance this month, and then we're going to a trope. We did enemies to lovers this month, and then in the final week we're going to look at a book and talk about all those things. And this month we picked Ali Hazelwood's Love on the Brain, which if you haven't heard of it, you've probably been under a rock.
And you've definitely not been listening to us the last few weeks.
So Ali Hazelwood's probably one of the biggest names in rom-coms right now. You would have heard of The Love Hypothesis probably. But I would say Emily Henry, Ali Hazelwood, who else is huge?
Christina
Beth
Lauren?
O'Leary.
Oh, Beth O'Leary.
Christina Lauren.
There's a few. Eleanor
Helen
Armas.
Hoang.
Yeah, there's a few, but Ali is one of the big ones. And she is...
Tessa Bailey is another big one.
She's so big, Ali Hazelwood, that if you go on Instagram and you're looking for stickers to put on your story, there are stickers of her characters. That's how big it is. Everyone is IGing this stuff. So I'm going to just hand over to Georgia quickly to do a plot summary because she volunteered.
Yeah, I'm going to have to try to remember it. So, from the couple of weeks ago that I read it, we have the main female protagonist, B, God knows how to pronounce her last name.
Königswasser.
Königswasser. And she is joining a project at NASA and working with a old PhD colleague, sort of, Dr. Levi Ward, who's an engineer, and together they're working on a helmet, some sort of eye.
Yeah, because she's a so it's a neuroengineering, right?
Yeah, so she's a neuroscientist,
yeah,
and he's an engineer, and they're working together to create some kind of helmet. I kind of forget a lot of the science stuff in the book because I've always stuck to science.
I'm sure the STEM readers have not forgotten, but we have.
And then there's like a lot of sort of bumps that come along the way as they're trying to make this helmet, and as they have to work together, even though she thinks he hates her, and he thinks she might hate him.
I really like the tagline. B. Königswasser lives by a simple code. What would Marie Curie do?
Yeah.
I think that's wonderful. And the whole book's got that conceit all the way through about what would Marie Curie do and little stories about Marie Curie.
Yeah. There's quite a lot of little subplots in it, actually, like little things that happen, little plot points. It just keeps going. She has her Twitter account.
She's so funny too, I have to say. I think...
I loved her personality as well.
Yeah.
B's personality. I don't know Ali Hazelwood's personality. Personally, I'm sure she also has a wonderful personality.
Do you know what? I will say, as the Gen Z at the table, I find it a little bit millennial. I
think I don't know what that means. I don't know what that means. Like,
do you know what? Ali Hazelwood got a bit of shit. I will, because there's a point in the book where the character removes galaxy leggings.
She's a neuroscientist working at NASA.
I know. But galaxy leggings, I think, are something that like Gen Z kind of make fun of millennials for a little bit. Or we used to.
Oh, we're getting into the generation.
Oh my gosh, so lame. I thought you guys were the generation that didn't make fun of people for how they dress.
I think if we
only Galaxy leggings,
only Galaxy
Kathleen.
leggings, but
and straight leg jeans and side parts.
I think that she is very funny. I do enjoy it. I think like the trademarking thing that she does throughout.
Oh my God, I loved that. Yeah, really cute. But
it's really cute.
she has got a really strong voice, I think.
She does. She
so
does.
it's first person. So it's all from Bee's perspective. And it's just kind of got all her sense of humour all the way through. And the titles too, the way she titles each. So my voice is probably going in and out because I'm looking down at the book.
Yes.
The titles are based around parts of the brain, which is kind of funny.
Which I'll be honest, I read them. You know, when you read a fantasy book and you don't know how to pronounce someone's name, and so you just kind of say, there's just kind of a sound going on in your head. That
I watched a reel about that the other day.
Like what I can't even, like a lot of them I can't pronounce, but the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex. Okay, I pronounced that all right.
We're assuming. There's no scientist in the room to tell you that it was wrong.
But yeah, I think that she has like a lovely style to the way that she writes and like a very distinct tone that I was ultimately jealous of.
Yeah, it really got the character across, I think.
Yeah.
You get a really clear sense of Bee. She's kind of highly strung, really passionate about her job, quirky.
I will say very similar to her other character in The Love Hypothesis.
Yeah, I think she has a thing going.
Yeah. They're similar characters. Yeah.
But I think
that's her biggest critique on Goodreads reviews.
But then it's
Their
partly what
characters are
people
similar.
are clearly
it's like
responding
reading
to.
Yeah, people like them. People just want to read sort of
and I think maybe
characters.
Maybe it's because we don't see enough of them. Like we don't see enough of these kinds of quirky STEM girls. So I thought I'd go through and just sort of talk about some of the topics that we've touched on the last few weeks, but in terms of the concrete specifics of this book. So thinking of it as belonging to the academic romance subgenre, I feel like Ali Hazelwood is one of the kind of foundational writers of this genre.
Hugely. I don't even know who else is really writing about it.
Oh, there'd be other STEM writers, but I'm
I
like,
don't know
I feel like she's like the STEM
She's the icon of it.
girly,
Yeah.
like the leader.
I have to confess, it was probably, and again, I'm showing my age because like I'm only just getting into these rom-coms in the last couple of years. But that's not true. I've been reading them since Helen Huang. But I feel like you guys are passionate fans, whereas I'm not
Well-rounded.
more of a general polymath. So I have to say I'd not read anything that went into such detail around like neuroengineering and neuroscience, and I really enjoyed it. I felt it had a kind of authenticity to the experience, whereas I think if I tried to write it, it would be faked a little bit.
Oh yeah, I think that I was reading it and it's entirely believable. Like if someone really is a neuroscientist reading it or an engineer or whatever, like they might not believe it as much as I do.
Maybe it's like when doctors watch Grey's Anatomy and they're like, oh, and the rest of us are like, wow.
Yeah. Like I read it and I'm like, yeah, that sounds so totally something like that could happen. That's real. Like there's it absolutely, and it makes sense. Like she writes about it in a really digestible way for someone who sucks at science.
And the detail around NASA too, like to actually locate it in a real place.
Yeah.
And, talk about real processes. But as an academic who works at a university, I've worked at a couple of universities, and the academic stuff was really believable to me. Like the postgraduate program, the labs, the dynamics of
the conference,
the sexism.
Yeah. Well, let's just dive into that then. Because
you were waiting for the prompt.
Well, I think, the way she copyrights all her names for stuff is really funny.
Yeah,
like trademarks everything.
Yeah, Cock Cluster, and then what's the other one?
Cock Cluster, Worst Fest.
And what Cock Cluster is the worst one, and then what Worst Fest is when there's like one other woman, and then Cock Cluster is when there's just you're the only woman.
Yeah, like here's a quote. I love this, right? So this is, the hero's name is Levi, and she goes to work with his team at NASA, and she talks about her and her, there's only like 3 women in the room. There's her assistant, Rocio, how do you say it?
Rocio?
I have no idea, but that's fine.
We'll go with that. And then the kind of manager, Kaylee, who's like the office manager kind of organizer.
Yeah.
And she takes stock of the room and she says, Levi's team appears to be worst fest TM material. The well-known meat wave, a dick-explosion of testosterone, and the good old brodio. And then she says, worst fest TM is bad, but at least it's a small step up from cock cluster TM, which is what Annie and I called academic meetings with only one woman in the room. I've been in cock cluster TM situations countless time in grad school, and they range from unpleasantly isolating to wildly terrifying.
Yes. None of it being pleasant is basically what she's identified there, right?
Yeah, but I think even in the humanities, you've often been in situations where you are one of the only women in the room, if not the only one.
Yeah.
And
Unless you're in the classroom, in which case you've probably got other women in the classroom, but anything in the outside of the classroom, it's still ridiculously male dominated.
Yeah, and there is, I think the way she presents that, like all the way through, is so accurate. It hurts.
Yeah,
It
and I
was
think
really
that she's
painful.
like, I think that she's also like quite almost fun about it and like jokey about it in a way that like
There's a real edge to it.
yeah, yeah, and I feel
It's like that if you don't laugh, you'll cry.
yeah,
Totally.
and I think that that's kind of how I approach things as well, just
But
in terms of
I think even the fact, she talks about, I can't remember the name for it, where a guy stands up for you. What's that called? I've got it here somewhere.
Well, I did like how she discussed that dynamic.
yeah, I feel like that was good.
Sausage referencing. she
yeah,
calls
sausage
it.
referencing.
So when all the guys disagree with her, like she's the expert in the room. But I also loved the bit where the junior guy sort of quotes herself at her. That scene where
Yeah.
he's
Yeah.
trying to disagree with her about neural pathways, even though she's the expert on it.
Yeah.
He's like, I took one class in undergrad, and she's like, I did a
I'm a
PhD in it. I'm like the world leading PhD in this. And he's like, yeah, but I took one class in undergrad, so like you should totally listen to me. And then Levi's literally like, you've got to be kidding me. Like, of course we're listening to her, but
Yeah,
I
and
think
that's the scene. If you don't mind me reading it.
Yeah,
There's a
read
bit
it.
Where she's arguing with this guy and she says, I nod and smile, though maybe I shouldn't smile. Maybe the reason I have to deal with this crap is that I smile too much. And the guy keeps pushing back and the hero says, I think we can take the word of a PhD trained scientist with dozens of publications on this, he adds in a calm but authoritative voice. Then he takes another bite of his apple and that's the end of the conversation. See, sausage referencing TM works every time. And it's like you still need the dude to kind of give you
legitimize it.
authority.
you need the authority of a man.
Yeah, and in this case, the hero, right?
Yeah.
So that is set up. This is what I want to dive into. That is set up as like a hero move on his part. Like, oh my
Yeah.
God, look, he's standing up for her.
yeah.
But I still found it completely annoying.
Oh, you read it and I was like, oh, thank God. I love
Yeah,
it.
I think that's why I read him as a cinnamon roll, is because I seen this as the soft way to be a hero. Like I think the alpha hole way of being the hero here would have been to punch or get aggressive and in the face, and he just so casually did it and so quietly backed her up. And I guess I read it as a quiet.
I guess so, but it's still proximal power.
Yeah, I
it
think
still
it was
puts
like
him up the
he-
totem pole.
yeah, and
like
he
the
had
book
the
at no
confidence.
point.
He had the confidence about it because he has the power.
Yeah,
And so he can be.
But
doesn't
I
have to be
think the
forceful.
fact that impressed me was the fact there was a man who understood it and used it appropriately. How low is the bar in the world, right? Where I looked
Yeah.
at that and was like, wow, a man who understands his power and used it
I don't think
for good.
Like, I don't think I've ever had a form of sausage referencing. I don't think a man's ever like.
oh, I have.
I don't think a man's ever like helped sort of.
No, I
legitimize
have. But I
something
think
that I
also
say.
sometimes they do it when you don't need it.
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
I have
okay.
had women,
Oh, I think, yeah.
I've had other women in the room, when you do have another woman in the room, say, Amy doesn't need for you to stand up for her right now or to take her side or to take her part or she's doing just fine arguing for herself. And it is like there is this kind of paternalistic thing of even
Yeah.
stepping in.
Yeah.
My husband and I have this thing where I, like when he goes to step in defense of me, that I will just put my hand on his arm or knee
Yep.
if I don't need it.
Please don't speak to me.
Well, just in like an environment where he is like trying to read whether I need that assistance or not, and goes to jump in, and I'll just put my hand there like, I got this, and he'll not let me because he doesn't let me, but like he'll step back and give me the room to do that, because his inherent like I think just nature is to step in and be defensive, because that's a lot of people when they love someone. I do the same thing myself, and I will jump in to defend him, but I think I'm more passive with it and he's more aggressive with it. So we worked a system where I actually said to him, like, I know you don't know where I need it or not because your instincts overpower you, so I'll give you a cue. And that's how we worked it out, which maybe that's, you know, some people might go, ugh, if they thought of that, but that's what works for us.
I mean, and mine is not a criticism of Ali Hazelwood, because I agree. It's a moment in the book where you're like, he sees it, that's awesome, like he sees her. But there's more than one. There's several moments like with their boss, their line manager, where Levi has to step up for her. And it's great, but I think, and this is again not Ali Hazelwood, this is the cultural soup I'm talking about.
Yeah.
I just think we haven't got to the point yet where we're seeing women do it for themselves. And so I wouldn't mind segueing here to the characters, because we're getting there anyway by talking through the academic romance. I think it's interesting that I'm going to ask you what you think before I dive in with what I think, because and also I just want to preface this by saying I really love this book, and I am also an author, and all my books are flawed too, because I'm really talking about the culture, not the book itself.
Like, are you kind of saying that B lets Levi do it constant, or like not lets him,
well, it's principle and power,
has to rely on it? You wish that there was more of a strength to it.
It's still the patriarch having to hand you the power,
and I think that there is something. And I think that maybe one of the reasons Ali Hazelwood does it a lot in the book is because it constantly is reaffirming that Levi is not like other men, if you will, like not like other girls. Do you know what I mean? Like
but then she makes him the ultra patriarch.
Yeah. Oh no, he really is kind of the ultra patriarch, and I almost think that B sort of resigns herself to letting him sort of stand in as well, because sometimes even if I think about when I have to talk to men and I have to constantly argue my point, I do get to a point where I'm like, I just don't want to have to be doing this anymore. And I don't want to have to like, I don't want to have to constantly prove myself right.
Yeah. And that's what she says about sometimes it's isolating and sometimes it's threatening.
And so sometimes it is not necessarily nice. Like you don't want it to have to happen, but you kind of like.
I can on multiple hands count the male figures of authority in workplaces that I have been afraid of.
Yeah.
Like it's not a failing of the book at all, because actually you are at risk. And she talks about her boss as well, her other boss from the place she's left to come to NASA, and about how creepy he is and what a kind of sex pest he is.
And she does she kind of have a moment where she stands up to him?
Yeah, she kind of.
Yeah. So like I suppose it does happen. And I think that maybe just this constant choice to have Levi stand up for B exists more as like a way to like make him seem attractive.
And I think if I could poke that even further a little bit, talking about the fear, the astronaut, what's his name again? I've forgotten.
Guy. He's just Guy. He's a good guy. He's
Guy.
And he's kind of blonde and generic.
The guy.
He's the guy.
Spoilers, like as you know, you're here to book for book club, so you're going to have to.
Thing.
But he ends up being like the big bad, right? Like he ends up being a freaking asshole.
Yeah.
And he is the worst. But the whole way through the book, up until the minute it's sort of revealed, he comes off as the nice guy.
That's right.
And I think the thing
oh my God.
that harkens back to when we're talking about the need for men to stand up for women, or the men to sausage reference, is that even the nice guy can be the bad guy. Like you don't know who you trust. And I think it's like that sort of thing where men are like, not me, but it's like, well, I don't know that. Like I don't know that just looking at you, you're not that nice guy who's actually a secret rapist.
I think when you talk to nice guys, they have no idea how much you face it on a daily basis.
And
they're shocked. They're shocked if you say, I'm just going to say on this, I've never been in a workplace where I've not been sexually harassed. It's never happened.
Well, nice guys also.
I've never been on a train where I haven't been sexually harassed.
Nice guys also sometimes have a bit of a complex about being the nice guy, and they're like, I'm the nice guy, and no
Like,
woman
maybe
ever
you're not
likes
always
me.
the nice
yeah,
guy.
yeah, no, and yeah, it's my
Or maybe it's not about the women. Maybe it's about the other guys that are making it impossible for us to trust anybody.
yeah.
Like, stop thinking it's women that are the problem here. Maybe you should be calling out the other guys. And that's I think that's maybe even what the issue is there. Like, Sausage referencing, he backed her, but he didn't call out the other guy really.
No, that's right.
No, yeah,
and
that
it's not a
happens a lot.
cultural change. It's still happening on an interpersonal, individual level.
And it's only happening when there's a woman in the room, and you can kind of see, would he do that if the guy were, if B wasn't in the room and B wasn't trying to make a point?
Would he do that if he wasn't madly in love with B?
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah.
And here's the other thing. There are not that many women in this workforce. Like, there's literally, before B and her assistant arrived, there is the woman one woman who is the office manager, whose name is Kaylee, who is as girly as all get out, right? She looks like Elle Woods from Legally
that's
Blonde.
all I can think of when I think of Kaylee as Elle Woods.
Yeah, and I'm imagining her carrying like a pink pencil with a fuzzy pink thing on top.
Yeah.
Like, she's that over the top hyper feminine. So I just want to talk about and how much of this possibly comes from the fact that, and do you want to elaborate on this, you two, because you know more about it than me, that it was Raylo fan fiction?
Yeah, it was one that was already published and written on, but I don't think that any of the other characters are based on other characters in the movies.
But these two are kind of like, particularly Adam Driver as the hero's model.
That was
really.
the love hypothesis,
No, but
though, wasn't
this
it?
one too.
This one too.
This guy is totally Adam Driver.
They're so totally Adam Driver, except he has green eyes.
Yeah.
That's what you got. But like, it's like Amy and I were talking about it, and I think I talked about it with you as well, Kathleen, how he's constantly sort of reaffirmed as this like huge, big.
God, he's so big. Everything is so big.
And
he's
drives,
too tall.
Yeah.
He's
drives
he's
a
too
truck.
tall to go into space. He's such a big
he's
man.
so tall he can't go into space. He drives a truck, and he goes running, and he, can tackle people. Like, he's constantly
huge. And he's one of those original kind of alpha heroes who, if there's a fist fight, there's no way he's not winning.
Yeah. And like she's also really small and petite, and that's really emphasized as well.
Yeah. So if we talk about that gendering, on page 193 of my copy is the bit where he talks about going into space, and there's this real reinscription of hypermasculinity with this character, because he said he didn't even make it through the elimination round to be an astronaut because he's too tall. They recently tightened the height restriction, can't be taller than 6'2" or shorter than 5'1", and he's so tall. But then on that, the bit that put me off the most was the constant talk of how big his dick was.
Yeah, always.
Sorry, I love Ali Hazelwood, just referencing that. I'm not slamming the book. But, there's a bit where even he's wearing his shorts the first time they kind of fool around, and she can see him from a distance with an erection. She's like, it can't be that big, or she can feel it pressing against her. And she's like, it's almost like porn big.
Yeah. I think it's a fan fiction thing. I think it really does come from fan fiction. And I think
because always the biggest dicks get a blowjob, and this book's no exception.
And I think it probably also comes from like ideals about Adam Driver.
There is no mistaking how deliciously, furiously, eagerly big he is.
Oh my God, that's a really elaborate way to describe it. Like deliciously, furiously, eagerly.
Yeah.
God.
But it's constant. It's this.
Yeah, it is. There's a constant reaffirming of like size. And
bigness is eagerness, apparently.
But thinking about sausage referencing, this is the ultimate sausage. This is the top sausage.
Yeah. Yeah.
Sorry. I've lost it a little bit there.
The
top sausage.
It is. He's like and she tries to soften him. So there's this sense.
I'm vegetarian. Sorry. So
he's also glad he can't go to space because he's too tall because he was terrified, right? So this is supposed to soften him and everything. But all his behaviours are patriarchal. Like when his best friend has died and he's kind of taken on the emotional care of his best friend's wife and child. He's a paternal patriarch. He takes care of everyone. But also then you mentioned how fragile and light B is, but she also faints all the time.
Yeah,
fair enough.
He's always catching
It's
her.
a chronic condition. Yeah. Like I'm not having a go because I actually faint a lot. But it's the fact that she's small, delicate. She's also framed as like the manic pixie dream girl.
Oh yes.
Oh yeah.
Oh yes.
Do you know what I when I think about height in books, me and my friend Dimity, wow, she'll be excited for the name mentioned.
Shout out to Dimity.
We were reading.
The rest of us are all like, I won't drop a name. And George is like, I'm dropping the name.
Hey, Dimity.
We were reading Book Lovers, and they're like the same height in Book Lovers.
Yeah.
And he says, there's no woman too tall for a man, only men too insecure to date them, or something like that.
Oh, Emily.
Oh,
Emily
she's
Henry.
funny.
Winning us all over there.
And I remember Dimity sent me a screenshot or like a photo of that page, and she goes, "Whoa, this was so cool." And I was like, "Yeah, like it is nice. Like that's so ridiculous. Like, oh, woe is me because I'm really tall, but." You know, it is nice to see that, like, as opposed to the constant emphasizing on women as small.
Well, and the flip side of that in this book is not only that he's really tall and has a big dick, but she's really small.
Yeah,
and really tight.
Really
Really small vagina.
You know
as well.
what? Biologically, there's tightness isn't really like unless you have like vaginismus. You know, like tightness is shouldn't really be a big thing. If you want to read Come As You Are by Emily Nagoski, anyone? I'm not going to elaborate, but it's very good.
But I thought that was really interesting that we have, it really is a feminist text, and it's really pushing like some politics in here that I really love. But there's also that falling back into the small manic pixie dream girl. And at important moments she faints or he rescues her, like at the cemetery.
Yeah.
He has to come and rescue her when the bad guy attacks. I really would have liked to see her beat the bad guy by herself.
Yeah, and I think she could have.
She's always just got that little bit of hopelessness to it, isn't it? She's like a little bit helpless, even though she's a neuroscientist.
But I guess that's the fantasy of Adam Driver, of the big guy who's being rescued and taken care of.
But also still considering
I just don't get that.
I
don't get the Adam Driver thing.
But clearly a lot of people do.
I think the Adam Driver thing is the size thing.
He's very intelligent.
Really?
Yeah,
I have to say, I find
his
his intelligence really attractive, and his
he's got a weird wit to him.
Yeah.
There is, I don't know that I like physically am attracted to him, but I think that there is something about him. But he's like a movie star and still really like.
But there is the fantasy of the alpha and the big guy and the protective guy. Like, I don't want to write it off because I think it's actually playing a role. Like, I think you've talked about this before, Kathleen, I think on the show, that women do a lot of labour. They do a lot of emotional labour. They do a lot of caretaking. Or they are treated badly a lot of the time by men. And so it's a nice fantasy to have the alpha guy, like the ultimate sausage, be kind to you and see you and take care of you.
Yeah, but also still fulfill sort of masculine roles a little bit as well.
You did mention Come As You Are, the book.
Yes.
And again, everyone is different. So, like, seriously, if you love the sex in this book, good on you. I'm cheering you on. I think sex is a really personal thing, and I really appreciate that everyone has different things that turn them on and different fetishes, and all power to you. Like, I think if you're an adult and you're not hurting anyone, go for it. But for me, I didn't. Kathleen mentioned the blowjob scene. That really turned me off.
I don't know if I've ever read a blowjob scene that I've been like, yeah, this feels sexy. Instead, I feel like I'm choking while I'm reading it.
I've never.
Sorry. I do. Okay.
Well, look, I think
you can't talk about the world's most giant sausage and then be like, this is comfortable in my mouth.
I'm just going to remind myself here that that you're both doing theses that include sex, and that I'm not feeling creepy about talking about sex with my postgrads at all. But,
we're all women of age.
We've had supervisor things where we talk about,
I think
trend
sex.
of anal sex and things like that.
Well, I think because it is relevant, and it is relevant to power, and it is relevant to sexual education, and I think romance is a form that is doing a lot of work in that space, and particularly a lot of reflecting the mess of the culture, so you can really track some of these sexual issues through the fantasies we're having, but also you can see the work being done to try and push back on those things.
I think the idea of a blowjob being enjoyable, even when they have a massive, huge dick, that's like a.
I think oral sex, is a healthy, great thing for people to do, and go nuts if you're enjoying it. And everyone,
100%.
Everyone deserves to enjoy oral sex, in my opinion. But I just found the description of it to be, for me, very much based on a kind of male gaze porn.
Yeah.
And about serving, like giving him pleasure. It was a scene that gave him pleasure, not her, which is fine. Like everyone should have mutual pleasure. He'd given her quite a lot of pleasure up until then.
Mm-hmm.
But there was something degrading. So can we just describe
Well,
it
it
for
came
the
after.
listener?
It came also as a reward for his emotional vulnerability
But this
when
is-
he like went and dealt with his family, and she was like, as a way to make it up to you, make you feel better, I'm going to give you a blowjob, and it was like, ooh, this doesn't feel. You want to give the guy a blowjob because you just want him to feel pleasure, the same as he wants to give you one to feel pleasure. Great, but can we not make it a reward system?
But again, I think as well, there's kinks going on here that there's just shades of it because it's a rom-com. I think it's not getting as heavy into kinks as other genres might.
Definitely.
But there are definitely shades of BDSM in there, and I think the size stuff about the two of them is also, hinting at that. And I haven't read the fan fiction she wrote, but I'm guessing maybe there's BDSM leanings.
Well, I think that I've never read a blowjob scene like this in a rom-com before, and I think that its fan fiction origins are probably the reason something like this has ended up in this book. Can I describe it a little bit?
Yeah, I can read a chunk of it too if you want.
Yeah, go on.
Settle in,
Do you want to read
listeners.
it?
I won't read the worst.
I bet you didn't think you were getting a blowjob for the ears, but you are.
I won't read the graphic stuff, but it's the idea he says to her, I'm going to come in your mouth like it's inevitable.
Yeah.
And she whimpers from how much she wants this for him.
Mm.
And then he loses control a little when he comes, and so he's unusually rough, his grip vice-like. And she feels empty, trembling, a messy lump on the floor. And then he says,
Empty.
Open your mouth, he rasps. I blink at him confused. He cups my cheek. I want you to open your mouth and show me. I comply, and the sound he makes, possessive and hungry and pleased, travels through me like a wave. He massages the back of my neck while I swallow. His thumb caresses my jaw. And when I smile up at him, he stares at me like I've just gifted him with something divine. And that was the moment I was like, I don't know about this.
I don't like the empty thing, the idea that the emptiness, like
but also,
after
she's
doing
also
it. And like he,
numb on the floor. Like there's a kind of trauma in it somehow.
and just like, the massaging is weird also.
Yeah, like what? There's so much in there that she's.
But I think probably the bodily fluid nature of it as well.
It's very abject, isn't it?
Yeah, the abjection of it
very
harkened back to
pornographic.
pornography.
Yeah,
You're
it is.
like you're watching Red Tube
And I
or
just,
something.
and I think that the
I don't know. Oh no, I'm not. Okay, never mind. I'm going to be too disgusting.
I think like the pornifying of things is, I think that representations in sex can help women. Kathleen and I have been talking about this a bit. So I don't say it the right way. I think that you need to be conscious of the way that you are representing sex, and if it is maybe leaning towards pornographic representations, where a lot of the time in pornographic representations, it sort of reinforces a power dynamic, and it reinforces sort of submissive and dominant roles, with the woman in submissive roles and the man in dominant roles. And I think that you just need to be conscious of the way.
Well, but it is a fantasy, right? Like people can have it there, and we can not like it. But I think we're saying we had I had a strong negative reaction.
It just didn't suit the characters really either. I don't know. Maybe it did. I don't know. But like, where does that
I actually think it does more the more that. So like I said, I viewed him more cinnamon rolly, and then especially Amy's breakdown of the masculinity and the way that he didn't really challenge it overly, even if he did support her, and he was in a hyper position of power. He did at times, but not good enough, I would say. I do think that this scene, for me, just as we've been talking about it, sort of I'm like, okay, no, that wasn't cinnamon rolly. Like
no,
there was,
especially because this is the end. Like this is on page 287.
Yeah.
So by the end, we have him really reinforced as big, sexually dominant.
Yeah,
She
dominant.
moves-
there
she
was a
moves-
dominance to that scene.
She moves to his town, into his house, into his workplace.
Yeah.
Like
it's really interesting. And
Isn't it weird the minute you talk about it, you're like, wait, did I like this book? No,
Yeah,
I
but
do. I
I
still do.
really love it.
Yeah,
still
I
loved
did really like it too.
I still loved
really
it.
loved
Well,
her voice.
you mentioning that she moves to his town and his home and all that sort of stuff is just reminding me of Happy Place, which is what we're going to read. Have you read it yet, Emmy?
I'm halfway through it.
Oh, no talking
yeah,
then.
then I can't talk about it. But there's something interesting about her, like the idea that she moves into his house and she moves to his town and she works in his workplace. And that's, when you read Happy Place, I think you'll kind of understand what I'm getting at.
There's different
later on.
representations and ways to do it.
Yeah.
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 I definitely, I'm very conflicted. I really loved this book.
Me too.
Yeah, I did too.
I did really
I just
enjoy
hated
it.
that scene. I got
Yeah.
I was like,
And I
I'm just
think-
going to pretend. But the thing is, it's seared on my brain now.
Well, there's-
yeah.
what
Well, we did just read it out
No,
loud.
no, but even afterwards,
Yeah.
I was talking to Georgia about it a couple of days later, and I
Yeah.
was just like, I just feel like for me, that doesn't line up with my, I guess, my sexuality and my way of thinking about sex. And I mean, not, again, like everyone's, like clearly this works for people and clearly it works for, and there's a lot of romance I'm not into because of the shades of, like, I'm not that into power where the woman is dominated. I just don't, it's not my kink, not my thing. This is too much information when you're my student. But I think for
We're
me,
also your colleagues. It's fine.
yeah, and I think that
But there's something behind why
the
women
power
might not be interested
bothers
in
me. in
Yeah.
that. Because he's so much bigger and she is very vulnerable in that moment.
I think that it would have. I think that
She's giving him the gift of her vulnerability. I think that's
Yeah.
what I don't like, is that she is putting herself in kind of sexual danger in that
in
moment.
a submissive
Because he loses control. She says he loses control and he's like grabbing her head.
Yeah, there's some conflicting messages.
And
I
she's
think it's
completely
written
submitting.
conflicting, like, and I guess this is the hard part about writers and the job of being a writer, is that, especially if you're just trying to be sexy, and look, I don't know, I'm not saying that that's what the writer here was trying to do, but if you're trying to be sexy and you're trying to make something sexy, you may subconsciously engage with
I have.
confusing power dynamics.
And this is
And it's
why,
not.
This
It's
is why I'm not having a go, because I
Yeah.
know I could go back to my books and I could do the exact same kind of critique of my own work and be like, I really re-inscribed something I wish I hadn't.
And
there.
sex in particular is a really tricky
so hard.
place
personal.
to, and it's a hard place to not engage with some forms of dominance because of the vulnerability of women in sex.
And
no
also-
matter what it is.
But also the way our sexuality develops, it doesn't develop in a vacuum.
Yeah.
Like you're speaking neuroscience, but you know your pathways of your brain develop in a culture, in a kind of milieu where you are exposed to sex in certain ways and turned on by certain things, and it's not in a vacuum and it's not perfect, and so all of us will have things that trigger us that are, you know, maybe not aligned with our politics.
And actually, I agree with you, Amy, because I find that I've read a lot of romance, and it is the male receiving a blowjob that I always feel an inherent sense of danger when I read it. And I don't know whether that's personal or whether that's just something about my generation or whether that's something else altogether, or just all the books
It's
I've
a
read.
very
There's
different
something.
kind of intimacy, the blowjob. Like I think,
Yeah.
oh God, we are getting into
This
it
is
today. This is quite a sexual. We're not even
club
at-
slash
so,
blow club
yeah. We need trigger warnings on all of these episodes.
Sorry, guys.
But I think it's a very powerless position
yeah.
doing that
Well,
to another
that-
human, and it's not a straight thing. Like gay men also do
Yeah.
it, and like people of other genders who have penises or engage with penises do it. But it's a very vulnerable position where your airways can be choked, like where you are in a submissive position, and so. Yeah, there's a power dynamic there that you have to be very cautious with, I think.
Well, people often talk about oral sex on women as like a very intimate act.
Yeah.
Like that's like a like
Whereas
they're like
on
oh
men,
no,
it's like a handshake.
Yeah, like it is like
Well,
for,
like you
for women
think about
it's
it.
A handshake with teeth.
They
And,
don't
like,
even
yeah.
consider it a sex act. Some people, like Bill
Yeah.
Clinton, didn't consider it a sex act, and I think there are whole chunks
Jesus.
of generations in millennials and Zs who don't consider oral
No.
sex full sex.
But they consider it on a woman this like incredibly
God, it's
intimate
the next
thing.
level.
It's like really like, oh my God, he's committing so much by going down on a woman or something like that in romance
How
novels.
unpleasant.
And that's that's like a big thing that happens in romance novels. Like if men are really giving, it's like to show that they're really like nice and into her and like
Well,
but for women it's
there's
expected.
something in that about female anatomy and dirtiness that
Whereas-
is inherently.
whereas penises are always clean and
Oh my God.
fabulous.
I'm like, I went away recently with some women and we were talking about this. We were talking about how we've been programmed to inherently believe that there is a dirtiness. Like we were talking about how like a woman always like tends to wash her hands after she pees, but she doesn't really touch any of her private parts. But the amount of guys that touch their private parts but then don't wash their hands. But then when we were talking to the guys were like, yeah, but we don't, like, we're just touching skin. Like, it's just touching your elbow or it's just touching your knee. Like, they're like, we're not touching the part that has the pee on it.
And they don't even they don't wipe. They just chuck it right back in.
But I was like, it is this interesting idea of dirtiness and this sort of like crossing this boundary. And like, don't get me wrong, I'm definitely advocating for washing your hands no matter who you are, no matter what you're doing. Wash your goddamn hands when you go to the toilet or when you just wash your hands, all right?
Say everyone.
But I definitely feel like there's just even like the girls of us who were talking versus the guys talking and the inherent way that we think about our bodies and the way that we are programmed. Like even women know to be super hyper clean and hygienic, but men have this real like, what do you mean? It's not like I peed on my hand. I didn't touch the pee part. I was like, what?
And maybe let's move away from men to the culture. Has a weird fear of the vagina.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, hugely.
Yeah.
This constant insecurity for women in it, like this idea to get plastic surgery on it to make it look a certain way, to
Bleach it.
Yeah, to bleach it, to wax it, like everything about it.
Torture it.
Yeah. It's so.
But that's what I mean. Like as women, we were identifying this hyper need for cleanliness. That like, why do we even feel that? Like our vaginas are not dirty, and why do we feel this hyper? Like it's not even there. The men weren't projecting that on us. We were kind of discussing it amongst ourselves.
Actually, here's something interesting about the word clean that you're mentioning. So the other thing that tripped me up, and this is because I'm Gen X as well and grew up during the AIDS crisis and stuff. There's a moment where he says, "Oh my God!" First of all, yeah. Anyway, she says, I was just reading the line before. He says, "Do we need a condom?" And she shakes her head and mouths, "Birth control," eager to continue, right? And then I remember stopping and going,
because pregnancy is the only thing you can get from sex.
I was like, what? But then a couple of pages later in the next chapter, she says, maybe it was the quiet, sweetly bashful conversation we had about me being on birth control and about the fact that we've both been living like ascetic monks for long enough that we're sure to be clean. And I thought that was such an interesting
Way to get around it.
Also, no, but old-fashioned because,
so sure to be clean.
just because you haven't had sex in a while doesn't mean you don't have an STD.
No. Some of them last for
can I just
years
say,
years.
having an STD or an
Doesn't
STI
make
is not
you dirty.
dirty.
No.
I thought that clean thing was really weird. But also, AIDS doesn't, just because you haven't had sex for even a year doesn't mean you don't have AIDS,
exactly.
for example.
Like,
Or
But like
chlamydia
you
or
don't, a lot of people don't even
herpes
show
or-
symptoms. So
Exactly.
yeah, aren't most of them like on men like quiet, like asymptomatic or something? Don't men carry them a lot?
Oh, I think women do too. I mean, I just find it.
I think it's
I
like
found
chlamydia or something is one of those ones where you can have no
Yeah.
symptoms and still pass
I
it
found
around.
that really-
Either like anyone.
Really strange that
Yeah.
got in print because
also
I know a
think-
few years ago when you'd go to conferences, there was a lot of talk about the use of condoms. Like I know Mills and Boon for a long time were encouraging writers to discuss the use of condoms and the rolling on of the condom as sexy. And I just found it really interesting that very retrograde positioning of the condom.
I don't know what is supposed to be sexy about not using a condom.
He's probably too big for one.
Yeah, I was like,
Sorry, honey, I'm too big to hurt me.
I know. And then she should just pull it over her entire arm and be like, "Are you sure? Are you sure you're too big for
She's
it?"
tiny, so she can just put it over her whole body. Just like, look, see.
Oh, yeah. That's funny.
I want to make a little comment actually just quickly about I really liked her relationship with the other women.
Yeah. I loved her relationship with her assistant. That was
I thought the
beautiful.
assistant and then Kaylee.
Yeah, her reaction to
Yeah.
Kaylee was great too because they're very different.
Yeah,
Yes.
they're like polar opposite thing, but like obsessed with each other. I really liked that. I knew that was
very
coming.
fun.
Oh,
I did,
yeah. Oh,
You
yeah.
know it was coming.
Because
but
they
like,
were enemies to lovers as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, enemies because one of them were just so into the other. But
Well,
she
and
was like,
and when we say enemies to lovers, that was a one-sided enemy because I don't think Kaylee at all was her enemy.
no.
She just was like such a sweetheart.
It's just Rocio being like, "You're so pretty. I hate you."
I just love the way B would be like, oh my gosh, she's so mean to me. I love her. Like she just loved her just unapologetically for being unapologetically who she was. Like I think that's beautiful. Like when we talk about women supporting women, I do love women who love other women unconditionally. Like you can be whoever you want. You can do whatever you want. You can be all the things and you can be safe and you can be with other women.
I thought
and it's
Ali
nice.
Hazelwood does that beautifully because
Yes.
it's not just them, it's her friend Anne too. Is it Anne? I think it's Annie. Who, you know, her friend, spoiler alert again, slept with her
Yeah.
fiance.
Oh yeah.
But
that
then-
was quite good actually.
Yeah, when
though,
they run into each other again, she's hurt, but she's not
Yeah.
enraged at the woman. She's
Yeah.
enraged at her ex-fiance.
Yes.
And it's actually she and her friend end up rebridging their friendship.
Yeah.
And
There's
I
a
just-
devastation she has about the betrayal of her from her friend.
Absolutely.
And it's that's what she actually feels is the real loss, which that was just beautiful because that
Yeah.
is the real loss.
I think
Yeah.
she's really good at that. And I really loved the Marie Curie stuff. I really loved the voice. And, you know, a lot of it is, as we're saying, these cultural problems that just pop up. And are always going to pop up until we sort out equality, let's face it.
Yeah, there's no neat answer. It's not like there was a right way to do any of this.
No, and it clearly works for many, many people. Anyway, Ali Hazelwood, we love you, and we're going to be reading all your books and
yeah. I already
discussing them in
have,
such depth because there's so much to them.
Yeah.
Yes.
They've been amazing.
And
It
we
was a
love
great
what you're
read.
doing for academic women.
Yes.
Giving them a voice in the romance community. Thank you very much.
Excuse me, making noises as I just rustle up my program. But so we've just gone through our first month. We've really enjoyed talking about the Pamela Regis rule about the ending.
Yes.
And academic romance and enemies to lovers, and now Ali Hazelwood. And now I'm going to announce what we've got lined up for you next month.
Ooh.
So next
What
month
are we reading next month?
we're gonna look at Pamela Regis's rule about the point of ritual death, which we will unpack for you next week.
Yep, it's a biggie.
And then we're going to be looking at vacation romance.
Yay.
Which is a massive one at the moment. Huge, huge, huge. And I believe George is actually writing one of these.
Yeah.
And then we're going to look at fake relationships, like the fake dating, fake marriage. Everyone loves this trope as well. This is also a really big one right now. And just to be topical this year, we are going to be looking at Happy Place by Emily Henry for our book club. I know most of you already read it, but if you haven't, go out and get a copy of Happy Place and read along with us, and we'll have another great book club. She has been number 1 on the bestseller list with
As of
this
today.
book. Yeah,
Well,
amazing. You're
when we're
dating us
recording.
now. We're recording in
When
advance.
we're recording.
We're recording in advance. We've all got our hot little hands on Happy Place.
Amy got a signed version.
I did. I managed. I
Oh,
pre-ordered and I
jealous.
got a signed version. So thank you for joining us. We've had fun. I hope we will be graphic in this show because part of our research interest is around the
Yes.
representations of sex and sexuality and power and gender and all of those things. So if we haven't scared you off, please do join us. And feel free to drop us a DM on our Instagram.
Yes,
Love on
please.
Campus. What is it? At something Love on Campus.
Yeah, Love on Campus podcast.
Love on Campus podcast on
Yeah.
Instagram. We'd love to hear from you. If you've got any book recs, if you want to add to the conversation,
Yes, please.
join us. We're happy to have discussions and arguments. But thanks for joining us, both of you, and we'll see you next week for the point of ritual death.
See you next week.
Bye.
Bye.
Love this podcast? Support it and sponsor today. Simply head to AuscastNetwork.com for details.